Assalamu alaikum girls. Welcome to third lecture of Programming Fundamentals, and today we are going to discuss language processors. But let me first revise that we have already discussed different programming languages in the last lecture. We know that we have high level languages and low level languages. Low level languages are close to computers, and on the other hand, high level languages are close to human beings. It is difficult for human beings to understand low level languages, and it is difficult for computers to understand high level languages. So, in order to fill the gap, we need some translator. This translator is actually known as language processor or language translator. In order to understand this language processor in detail, we first need to study the types of codes. We have two different types of codes: source code and object code. A program written in high level language is called source code, and the program in machine language is called object code. Source code is also called source program. Computer cannot understand the statements of high level language. The source code cannot be executed by computer directly. It is converted into object code and then executed. So this is how we are going to fill that gap. And object code is also known as object program or machine code. Computer understands the object code directly. So you see that source code needs to be converted to object code in order to make computer understand. Otherwise, computer will not be able to execute the instructions we are giving to it. So that is why we are having a language processor. A language processor or translator is a software that converts instructions written in high level language into machine language. So we know that instructions written in high level language are known as source code or source program, and on the other hand, the instructions written in low level language are known as object code or object program. So, if I talk formally, I will say that a language translator is a program that converts the source code or source program into the object code or object program. Now, let me show you some more language processors. We have compiler, interpreter, and assembler. First of all, we will discuss the compiler. A compiler is a program that converts the instructions of high level language and into machine language as a whole. Let me make you understand. Every language processor is going to convert the source code into object code. Every language processor will be converting the high level language into low level language. The point on which I need to emphasize here in case of compiler is as a whole. It is saying that a compiler converts source code into object code as a whole. What does this mean? This means that I am going to write some instructions in a file using high level language. So this file will be known as source program, as it will be containing source code. Now the compiler will take that file and convert that whole file into object program, which means it will create a file which will be containing all instructions which I have previously written using high level language. Now they will be converted into low level language or machine language. So I provided a source file to the compiler, and a compiler converted that whole file into object program. Now, after conversion or after translation, this object file can now be executed. As I have converted it once, I do not have to convert it every time. Next time I need to execute that file, as it is already converted, it will be quickly executed. And the compiler checks each statement in source program and generates machine instructions. Compiler also checks syntax errors in the program. So here we have a simple diagram showing that we provide source program to the compiler. Compiler converts that whole program to object program, and this object program can now be executed. Next comes the interpreter. An interpreter is a program that converts one statement of a program at a time. Now, as we already know, every language processor has one task to do. It has to convert high level language into low level language, source code into object code. Same is done by interpreter, only the method is different. Compiler was translating whole file and interpreter translates one instruction at a time. Now imagine I provide one file having some different instructions in high level language or source code to the compiler. Now compiler will take first instruction, convert it into object code, execute it. Now it will come to second instruction, convert it into object code, execute it. Then third instruction, then fourth instruction, then fifth instruction. There is a little bit difference. What compiler was doing? It was first translating the whole file and then executing the whole file. Here, compiler is not maintaining an object file. It is just translating each instruction one by one and executing it. Now, the problem here is if there is an error in the statements, the interpreter stops working and displays an error message. The advantage of interpreters over compiler is that an error is found immediately, so the programmer can correct errors during program development. But we have a disadvantage also. The disadvantage of interpreter is that it is not very efficient. Why? This is because it does not produce an object program. It must convert the program each time it is executed. As an example, let me tell you, Visual Basic is a language which uses interpreter as translator. Next language processor is an assembler. Yes, if you remember, we have discussed assembly language, the one with the symbols and mnemonics. Yes, assembler is used for assembly language. An assembler is translating program that translates the instruction of assembly language into machine language. If you remember, assembly language was the language one step higher than the machine language. It contained some symbols or nicknames or different letters. For example, we used sub at the place of binary code for subtraction. So assembler is a translator which is used for assembly language. So we give assembly language program to an assembler and it converts it into object program. So let me revise. Today we have discussed language translators. The basic purpose of language translator is to convert the code written in high level language, which is also known as source code, into the code written in low level language, which is also known as object code. Why we need translators or why we are doing this? This is because the computers cannot understand the high level language and The humans cannot understand low-level language. So we need a bridge in between. That bridge is known as language processor and language translator. We have three types. First is compiler, second is interpreter, and third is assembler. Compiler converts the whole source program at once into object program, and after completing the conversion it starts execution. On the other hand, interpreter converts each line into object program and execute each line separately. It does not maintain a object file, due to which this is not very efficient. It is slow because every time we tell interpreter to execute a program again, every time it will again translate and execute the instructions. Next we have assembler. Assembler is a translator which is used for assembly language. I hope you have got all right. If you have any questions,